That's how the new history has begun. The 13th World Knowledge Forum. The Representative Business Forum of Asia, the community of knowledge leaders influencing the world. World Knowledge Forum, having initiated changes of the global village. With a new point of view free from the existing paradigm, World Knowledge Forum move forward to the future. In 2012, the world is facing the new turning point, the political restructuring of the world, and the 300-year-old capitalism facing the unprecedented crisis. The world of crisis and uncertainty. Inside that huge walls, there are the futures of individuals, corporations, and countries. And now, the 13th World Knowledge Forum is trying to propose the answers. The consistent philosophy and the new gaze are harmonized with creative ideas, which will help overcome the greatest crisis and eventually search for solutions to success. In 2013, for the Great Leap, the global agenda that World Knowledge Forum has the core factors to break through the crisis. 5 key words are suggested. The worldly renowned scholars in economy, the political leaders from major countries, and the influential business leaders on the global market. Will provide visions for the global village with their expertise and amazing insights. Through impressive lectures, heated discussions, and sharp critiques, knowledge is initiated, shared, and recreated in this festival. Right here, the innovative leadership will be born and lead the world in crisis toward the new growth, and the ethical and creative order of capital market will be established. And the warm-hearted power of knowledge in pursuit of the happiness of mankind will be spread widely toward the world. The 13th World Knowledge Forum, being held in the middle of transformation. We hope that right this place is the starting place of the new future for the humanities in the global village. World Knowledge Forum.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Welcome to the 13th World Knowledge Forum. I am Yong, reporter and anchor at MBN, and it gives me great pleasure to be your host this morning. We will now commence the ceremony with an opening speech by Dr. Chang Dae-hwan, Executive Chairman of the World Knowledge Forum and Chairman of Yong Media Group. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Chang Dae-hwan with a warm round of applause.
You know, the question was asked, where is your future? And ordinary people like me ask, where is your money? Or where is your job? That's the current situation facing most of the countries today. Distinguished guests and speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'd like to thank you all for your honored presence. I especially would like to extend my sincere thanks to Honorable Yong Kim, the World Bank President, and Condoleezza Rice, former U.S. Secretary of State. But please don't look around to find her. She'll be on satellite connection. Moreover, I wish to express my deep appreciation to Malcolm Gladwell, the New Yorker journalist, and Paul Krugman, professor of Princeton University. I'm also grateful for the presence of Wim Kok, former Prime Minister of Netherlands, Jean-Pierre Raffarin, former Prime Minister of France, Esko Aho, former Prime Minister of Finland, Mika Vehviläinen, CEO of Finnair, and Nouriel Roubini, professor of New York University, Stern School of Business. I have a long list of distinguished speakers that I should introduce, but due to time constraint, I will stop at this point. Fortunately, though, we'll have plenty of chances to meet with them. In particular, for this year's forum, we have made it possible for participants to directly interact with the speakers through smartphones and tablet PCs. Outside the Vista Hall, signing events will be held for those who would like to meet the speakers face to face. The World Knowledge Forum launched in year 2000, shortly after the Asian financial crisis, with the theme of shaping the new millennium with knowledge. Now, for the past 12 years, the forum has been the pioneer in seeking solutions for the crisis we face. Together, we have gradually developed the keywords of creation and cooperation, and we were the first to propose the term collabonomics. Also, the World Knowledge Forum stressed the importance of Asia early on. This is the reason why we have been consistently including the slogan of One Asia as in our themes. The world is now at an important turning point. Politically, this year alone, we'll see potential regime-changing elections in more than 30 countries around the world, and new leadership will be put to the test. Change of leadership might lead to a gap of leadership. This could mean immediate political and economic turmoil. The world economy, now taking a downturn, is presenting tough challenges too. Many uncertainties make it impossible to predict even the nearest future. The European economic crisis hardly seems to yield any solution. Pump priming may provide a short-term market boost, but many economists expect a bearish effect on world economy in the longer term. At the last year's forum, I stressed that the recent global crisis is not like any other in the past. While the financial crisis in 2008 could be resolved to some degree through international cooperation, today's crisis is so intertwined with political issues within and across nations that it would be very difficult to count on concerted international efforts. The world is finding it difficult to coordinate its efforts with no particular nation to play a leading role in overcoming the crisis. Now I would like to restate that the recent crisis may be just the beginning. Perhaps we haven't seen anything of it yet. We frequently hear the warnings that the world may be going to suffer the worst simultaneous recessions since World War II. I think the world is now entering another period of major transformations. For these reasons, we have chosen the phrase, the Great Breakthrough, as the theme of this year's World Knowledge Forum. We believe that only an entirely new way of thinking, creativity, and rich imagination can show us the solution to such a transformative period. As always, I'd like to find a clue to the solution in Asia, in knowledge, and in entrepreneurship. For the first time in 500 years, the hegemony of the world economy is clearly shifting from the West to the East. Asia is one of few remaining regions of the world, along with the United States, where entrepreneurship is still alive. This is all the more evident from the fact that much of the world's money is now flowing into Asia. In recent days, territorial disputes have been escalating to an alarming level in East Asia and other places. In times like this, the vision of One Asia is essential. Mutual respect and cooperation within the frame of One Asia could peacefully solve many of the problems. This year's World Knowledge Forum proposes several keywords for the solutions to the crisis: new leadership, growth, creativity, integrity, and happiness. The idea behind them is a change of leadership can generate a completely new creative leadership. This would in turn mean new growth. All the honored speakers we have here are the ones who inspire young people in the world, particularly to those in Asia. The messages speakers send out at this forum will inspire not only the 3,000 participants here, but also 4 billion Asian people out there. I believe you have every reason to be proud of it. With such preeminent speakers and all participants here working together, I believe we will come up with truly wonderful solutions. Thank you very much, and please start your personal knowledge management today and enjoy the forum. Thanks again. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to introduce the next speaker. The keynote speaker of the World Knowledge Forum today is President Yong Kim, who became the 12th head of the World Bank this past July. Born in Seoul, Korea in 1959, he immigrated to the United States at the age of 5. Afterwards, he received a PhD in anthropology and an MD, the Doctor of Medicine, from Harvard University. He brought medical assistance to combat tuberculosis in poverty-stricken areas in South America. And as the director in charge of AIDS at the World Health Organization, WHO, he committed himself fully to the treatment of AIDS. In 2009, he became president of Dartmouth College. The World Bank chief, Dr. Kim, might refocus World Bank mission from development finance to ending global poverty. Once I asked Mr. Wolferson, former president of World Bank, why don't you change your name to World Knowledge Bank? But he didn't took my idea. I think economic growth is important, but we need to pay more attention to shared prosperity, inclusive of young people and of women. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Kim to the podium. Let's give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
여러분, excuse me. 여러분 안녕하십니까?
Good morning, ladies and
고향에
gentlemen.
돌아오니
It's good to
정말로
be back
기쁩니다.
home.
장대환
Thank you,
박사님께서
Dr. Chang Dae-hwan.
장대환 박사님께서
Thank
이렇게
you,
빛나는
Dr.
자리를
Chang Dae-hwan,
베푸시고
for that generous
분에
introduction
넘치는
and
소개를
hosting
해주시니
this remarkable
마냥
gathering.
겸손해지고
I am humbled
힘이 납니다.
and empowered.
참으로 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much.
여러분 아시다시피
As you are
이게
well aware,
강남 스타일이 아니지만
what I'm going to say
즐겨
will not
주시기
be
바랍니다.
Gangnam style, but I hope you
Thank
enjoy
you very
this.
much, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. Let me start off by making one other quick comment. In the front row is my 79-year-old mother, and she's here today to give a talk based on her life work, studying Yi Taege, also known as Yong, one of the great philosophers in the history of Korea. And I just want to thank her for providing me with the desire and, frankly, the need to continue to push the boundaries of knowledge. We continue to push the boundaries of knowledge because we know it can make the world a better place. Let me thank Dr. Chang Dae-hwan again for that generous introduction and for this remarkable gathering. And let me thank all of you for contributing to these 3 days of debate and learning. It's especially encouraging to see a strong presence of Korea's private sector, whose pragmatism and adaptability have done so much to promote this country's progress. It would be inspiring to address this group of leaders anywhere in the world, but above all here in Seoul, the city where I was born, the capital of a country that in 50 years has risen from poverty and conflict to become one of the most prosperous and technologically advanced societies. Korea teaches us that development is possible even under the most extreme adversity. This lesson is more relevant today than ever before. The theme of this year's forum urges us to recognize the magnitude of current global challenges and, above all, to propose bold solutions. And it reminds us that bold action must be guided by knowledge. But what kind of knowledge do we need? As we meet in this capital of a young economic and technological power, we are conscious that the world is changing. Our way of thinking about knowledge and development must also change. 60 years ago, when Korea was a poor country and the World Bank had just been created, people thought power and development expertise could flow in only one direction, from the global north to the south. This model has vanished forever. This forum and the great city in which it takes place show that we live in a multipolar world. Power and knowledge springs from new sources and moves along new paths. Emerging economies now account for more than half of global economic growth. The global landscape is changing in so many other ways. Movements such as the Arab Spring, the campaign of Los Indignados, Occupy Wall Street, and social protests in many countries reflect people's demand for participation and a fair share of the benefits of prosperity. These movements remind us that radical inequalities in wealth and power are not sustainable. In a world of informed, empowered citizens, economic strategies cannot be divorced from the demands of social justice. Facing these challenges, governments and their partners can't get away with rhetoric. We have to deliver results. Current development approaches will only get us partway there. At the turn of the millennium, Dr. Chang and others in this hall led a process that transformed Korea's economy by deliberately placing knowledge at the center. I believe we need a similar evolutionary shift today in how countries, communities, and their partners harness knowledge for development. At the center of our development model, we must lay the groundwork for a new kind of knowledge, what some have called a science of delivery, that countries will use to meet the demands of their people. My remarks today have three aims. First, to show why we need a science of delivery in development. Second, to discuss some characteristics of delivery knowledge that will influence how this field takes shape. And third, to describe concrete steps the World Bank Group will take to strengthen our delivery work with countries and create foundations for the future full-blown science of delivery. As I speak with political leaders and partners in countries around the globe, I hear a recurring message. Most countries know the broad policy directions they should adopt to reduce poverty and build prosperity. Many countries have strong, coherent development policies and programs on paper, but they're not getting the results they want. In country after country, sector after sector, the greatest challenge is delivery. Delivery is an elegant word for getting goods and services to people in a way that meets their expectations. High-performing private companies excel in delivery. Delivery is crucial for the public sector too. As parts of government's social contract with citizens, delivery is critical. Never before have we understood just how critical good delivery is for economic development. Delivery priorities in development include material infrastructure like roads, power grids, and water systems. They also include services like education, healthcare, and social protection. But they also include ensuring that the private sector is open to and welcoming of investment from private sources, especially leading to the growth of good jobs as small and medium enterprises especially grow in so many countries in the world. Across all these areas, delivery lags today in many of the countries and communities where the needs are greatest. To improve development outcomes, we need to tackle delivery challenges head on. This is the next frontier for the World Bank Group. This is quite simply what the people demand. We can point to individual examples of delivery success in countries at all levels of income, but we need to move from isolated examples to broad global progress across all countries and all development sectors. To do this, we must work together to lay the foundations for a new field that will collect and distribute practical knowledge that countries can use to get delivery right in their unique contexts. There's an urgent need for a science of delivery and development, but that science does not yet exist. We must create it together. Countries will take the lead. The World Bank, the private sector, civil society, communities, and global development partners will contribute. I urge all of you here, thought leaders and innovators from many backgrounds and many countries, to seize this challenge and contribute your ideas and energy. As we pursue the discussion, I want to be clear about the division of labor between countries and the World Bank Group. It is countries that deliver programs. What the bank's practitioners deliver is evidence-based support and advice to national policymakers, program implementers, and private sector partners. In this context, delivery and delivery failure may seem like abstract concepts. Let's take a moment to remind ourselves what these ideas mean in human terms. Because of delivery failure, 1.3 billion people in developing countries lack access to electricity and remain shut out from virtually every benefit of modern life. Because of delivery failure, more than 280,000 women each year die in childbirth from obstetric complications that modern medicine can easily address. Because of delivery success, the percentage of Tanzanian children completing primary school rose from 57% in 2000 to 90% in 2010, enhancing millions of children's lives and giving them tools to achieve a more prosperous future. The good news is that the recent advances in many fields can help us improve delivery. Relevant insights are emerging in disciplines as varied as systems engineering, medicine, economics, and other social sciences, and the business fields of strategy, operations, and management. All these disciplines can feed evidence into an emerging field of delivery that will help countries improve development results. Excuse me. Let's not forget that excellent delivery work is happening in many settings much of the time. Private companies in all global regions solve delivery challenges every day to meet their clients' needs. The public services we take for granted in a modern urban center like electricity, water, and transportation networks are also daily demonstration of successful delivery. Effective implementers and high-functioning delivery systems are not that rare, but delivery has a paradoxical quality. The better it is, the less we notice it. This means that excellent delivery performance is often unrecognized even by those who benefit from it directly. We underestimate the complexity of the challenges and the importance of implementers' achievements. As a result, we don't make adequate efforts to analyze delivery success, capture the knowledge that made it possible, and transmit the lessons of that success in forms that others can use. All of you here know the people in your company or organization who are the movers, the problem solvers, the people the company calls in to handle the toughest cases. In fact, those of you here today are those people. Borrowing from my medical background, I like to call you people master clinicians. But we can simply refer to you as skilled implementers. Such implementers exist in every successful organization. The foundation of success in delivery is the tacit knowledge that is present in the heads of these implementers, in the habits of effective action that have become second nature to them, what we might call their muscle memory, like the unhesitating movements of a musician executing a piece learned through tireless practice. Development implementers working on the front lines acquire this muscle memory over the course of a career. They test solutions, observe the results, make corrections, test again. As they go through many of these learning cycles, their accumulated experience becomes practical know-how. In most cases where countries and partners achieve good development outcomes, it's actually this tacit implementer know-how that is driving the success. The challenge is to move from excellence in individual performance to broad improvements in the quality of delivery across whole sectors. For that, we must advance from experiential know-how of individual practitioners to the level of analytic knowledge, the level of science. We must analyze and compare the performance of large numbers of implementers. We must connect implementers' experiences and results to contextual data on politics, social conditions, country capacities, and other factors that affect delivery outcomes. We must create effective mechanisms to share delivery knowledge so that implementers can continuously learn from each other. And we must set up these virtuous cycles of learning in which practitioners continuously test innovations, capture results, and use these results to design new experiments. These are steps toward a science of delivery. Until we take those steps, delivery science itself faces a delivery failure, in that the bulk of implementer innovation is never properly evaluated, analyzed, and made available for shared learning. We're losing opportunities to spread success. It's time to end this waste of development know-how and to make sure poor people everywhere have access to every innovation that might help them improve their lives. I want to highlight 4 features of delivery that are especially important for how we'll work to build the field and realize its potential. First, delivery is about problem solving. It is a practical brand of knowledge that looks for the most effective means to achieve a defined end. An important consequence is that delivery is highly context sensitive. Solutions are determined by the needs and opportunities of a specific time and place. This is why the World Bank Group will work with country implementers and communities to build a delivery knowledge base from the ground up. And this is where the bank's sustained on-the-ground presence in more than 120 countries will be crucial. The World Bank will support countries to launch local delivery knowledge hubs focused on local problems, and will connect these country platforms to regional and global resources. Delivery knowledge hubs may take different forms and operate in different ways. Their purpose is to help countries learn systematically. A focus on local problem solving does not mean that context-specific knowledge cannot be aggregated to feed into the global pool of experience and evidence. There's a virtuous link between the local and the global, whereby knowledge that is relevant to one context can be adapted rather than adopted in other contexts. The key is to evaluate rigorously so that local knowledge gets transformed into evidence available to others. The World Bank Group can play a crucial role as knowledge broker in this exchange. First, by supporting local innovation and delivery, and then by making sure that local results are evaluated and aggregated as globally accessible evidence. Our work in supporting the collection and dissemination of evidence on conditional cash transfer programs is one example. Since cash transfers were first launched in Brazil and Mexico in the 1990s, the bank has facilitated more than 200 South-South knowledge exchanges that have helped countries learn from each other how best to implement these programs. Second, delivery is concerned with complex systems. Delivery and development addresses social goals. Societies are composed of interpenetrating systems. To achieve any social aim, we have to engage multiple natural and human-made systems that mutually influence each other. Many low-income countries face capacity constraints and their systems are weak. But building and managing complex systems is where the World Bank Group excels. For more than 60 years, we've been helping countries around the globe design and operate systems to deliver on social and more on goals in the private sector. We can analyze a delivery system in its totality, pinpoint capacity gaps, bottlenecks, and identify intervention points. As we work with countries to build the science of delivery, these are the issues we'll be tackling, bringing to bear our existing systems knowledge and applying it in new ways. When Professor Michael Porter and I built the Global Health Delivery Project at Harvard, we studied health systems challenges. We found that to get a deep reading on health systems, the best approach was to send out multidisciplinary research teams that included doctors, public health specialists, but also anthropologists, management experts, historians, journalists, and ethicists. Triangulating different forms of data helped us discover what was driving success or failure in the programs we analyzed. One of the World Bank Group's distinctive strengths is our ability to combine depth of knowledge in key development fields with multidisciplinary breadth. We can mobilize in-house expertise across a wide span of disciplines, and through our convening power in networks, we can connect our clients to an even wider array of international expertise beyond our own institution. Fourth, delivery knowledge is interactive and evolving, and this is what makes it so difficult. It differs from what we're used to in disciplines that are more quantitative and abstract, less context-dependent. Delivery solutions change with the context. Delivery knowledge is constantly renewed through dialogue among practitioners and stakeholders. Delivery principles emerge in collaboration and communication as people and institutions problem solve together. Delivery knowledge is social knowledge in a way that traditional forms of scientific knowledge have been thought not to be. Here's an example of what this means in practice. In the 1980s, efforts to raise child survival rates in poor countries had stagnated. Millions of children were dying each year from diseases that could be prevented or cured with simple, cheap technologies, including vaccines. But delivery of these simple interventions had stalled. Leading agencies, in particular the World Health Organization and UNICEF, realized they needed a dramatic change in strategy. The solution was to create a task force made up of experienced implementers whose authority all agencies accepted. People like Bill Foege, a teacher of mine, who had driven major parts of WHO's historic eradication of smallpox. The new group was called the Task Force for Child Survival and Development. Essentially, it was a delivery workshop. Many of the group's meetings were intensive problem-solving sessions. Participants identified delivery bottlenecks that were blocking progress in countries and used their collective experience to find solutions. The task force changed history. In just 6 years, from 1984 to 1990, childhood vaccination coverage in developing countries soared, quadrupling from 20% to 80% by some estimates. What was the secret? Technologies involved had long been known. What had been missing was a framework for joint learning and decision-making among master implementers. The key was interactive problem solving with a laser focus on results. These are the kinds of models we're looking for. One consequence of the interactive nature of delivering knowledge is that the quality of our knowledge depends on the inclusiveness of the debate. Excluding shareholders from conversations deprives us of critical data. Thus, if grassroots community voices aren't heard, our understanding of delivery processes will be distorted and incomplete. In our delivery work, the World Bank Group and our country partners will reinforce the participation of beneficiary communities in all facets of program design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. Let me now end with the 3 practical steps that the World Bank Group will take to strengthen our delivery collaboration with countries and lay the groundwork for the science of delivery. First, the World Bank Group will support an initial wave of 3 self-selected countries to create national delivery knowledge hubs for development. These hubs will coordinate people and resources to tackle priority national delivery problems and disseminate learning. Countries will structure their hubs in accordance with their national agendas. In most cases, hubs will be based within existing public or private institutions. Some may be entirely virtual. If countries request, the bank will provide startup financing, technical assistance, and support for knowledge sharing and dissemination. I'm pleased to announce that Minister of Finance Praveen Gordhan of South Africa has confirmed his country's intention to be the first pilot country. When I visited South Africa last month, President Zuma, Minister Gordon, and other leaders were clear that improving delivery in core infrastructure and social sectors was their top national priority. Delivery is the key to reaching South Africa's goal of inclusive prosperity, and the government is determined to do whatever it takes to get there. The World Bank Group looks forward to working with South Africa as the country tackles this historic challenge. We encourage other interested countries to contact us. Second, we'll refocus the bank's measurement work to better support progress in delivery. Specifically, to know if delivery is working, output indicators are not enough. We've got to measure results. Not just how many kilometers of rural roads get built, but whether the roads are helping reduce poverty. Not just how many children are in school, but whether they're learning. In recent years, the bank has taken steps to incorporate more outcomes measures in our project data collection. We're committed to expand this approach. We'll invest in tools and strategies to collect outcomes data that can inform country decisions around delivery for better results. Third, we'll use innovative approaches and tools to capture the tacit knowledge of master implementers and teach delivery skills. We'll apply a range of strategies. 3 of these approaches are 1, case-based learning, 2, clinical mentorships, and 3, a commitment to learning from failure. A proven tool for teaching practitioners about complex systems is the case study method used in business, engineering, and health science schools. The case method uses a narrative model that avoids reducing complex situations to simplistic schemas. At Harvard, we found that the case method is an extremely effective way to study how global health decision makers, for example, navigate complex systems. At the World Bank Group, we'll build a library of delivery case studies and use these as a resource for training bank staff and country implementers who want to take advantage of the opportunity. We'll invite our partners from throughout the world to contribute to what we hope will be a rapidly expanding case library. We'll also create a mentorship program to build the next generation of master implementers within the World Bank Group. This program will assign promising young professionals to work with seasoned implementers. Master implementers will transmit their know-how through collaborative work, tackling real problems for our partners. A third learning approach is especially important to me. Historically, development institutions have been reluctant to acknowledge failures, much less analyze them publicly. But that's exactly what we're going to do at the World Bank Group. Policies and projects that go wrong carry valuable lessons, but institutions are often wary of revisiting them to learn those lessons. How can we avoid repeating past mistakes if we don't talk about those mistakes openly, diagnose what went wrong, and share our findings so others can avoid the same traps? I want the World Bank Group to set an example for the development community. Here again, we will build on promising precedents. Many bank staff have already participated in discussions called fail fairs, which explore why specific projects fell short of expectations. I want to expand these events, make them more systematic, and disseminate the results. I will start chairing these workshops personally. The first is scheduled for early December. These sessions will not place blame on staff. Instead, they will let us collectively understand the factors that cause good intentions to yield less than satisfactory results. Going forward, we'll broaden participation in these exercises to include affected communities and outside critics, and we'll publish the proceedings and conclusions. In closing, I want to return to the heart of the World Bank's work, our relationships with countries and with the poor who live in them. I believe our work together, building the science of delivery, will contribute to a fundamental evolution in this relationship. I've talked about the collaborative, interactive nature of delivery learning. For some time now, the bank and its clients have been growing from a traditional relationship of lender and borrower towards a true partnership in implementation and learning, where we link our skills to pursue evidence-based action around common goals. The science of delivery is a catalyst that will speed this shift. Beyond providing money and knowledge, the World Bank Group will be an organization that innovates, co-creates, and learns together with its clients. At the same time, the bank also serves its partners by doing something that none of them can do in isolation: create knowledge-related global public goods that support shared learning processes at global, regional, national, and subnational levels. I've discussed delivery science with political leaders from around the world. The reaction is often relief that global partners are finally catching on. Countries have been grappling with these challenges for years, and they know the stakes are high. Looking beyond today's economic uncertainty, many leaders in government, the private sector, and civil society remain committed to bold objectives for reducing poverty and building prosperity. They're right to maintain their ambitious aims, and countries are right in seeing that delivery will often spell the difference between stagnation and growth. Together, we'll open a new chapter in development, an era in which we will continuously improve our ability to deliver on our promises to the people, especially to the poorest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that speech, Mr. Yong Kim. It was an honor to hear you speak, but we are not ready to let him go just yet. We will have a Q&A session, and let me introduce our moderator for this morning, Mr. Rishad Salamat, a fellow anchor at Bloomberg Asia. So now I will turn the mic over to you, Mr. Salamat.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I think we'll all agree it was an exciting future for the World Bank and an exciting mission that you're actually at the moment outlining about the people who work for you, the way you deal with clients. But just give us a few more examples of the World Bank at its best and also perhaps the World Bank when it's not been so good.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that happened to me soon after I got the job was that President Bill Clinton called me. And what President Clinton said to me was, he said, Jim, you know, you've got to walk the halls, you've got to meet the people, you've got to try to win the House. You've got to try to understand what it is that drives people. So I did just that. And I think I visited just about every single vice presidential unit, which is, we have a lot of them. And I asked them that very question. I asked them just two questions, which was, when has the bank been at our best? And what would it take to be at our best all the time? So I heard multiple stories. And generally, the best stories are when we threw out all our rules and then went headlong into trying to just be problem solvers. So Haiti after the earthquake, Kyrgyzstan recently after the political turmoil, even here in Korea in the late 1990s, but also in Turkey, in Indonesia after the tsunami, in places where we had to act urgently. What happened was, rather than be bogged down by rules and regulations, people just moved. They brought the best people from throughout the bank to focus on a problem. And when that happened, more often than not, the outcomes were transformational. And so the question that we're asking in a very intense way now is, well, why can't we be like that all the time? The answer to that's complicated. Among the answers are that we have a resident board. We have a board that actually lives with us every day. They meet twice a week. And any of you who run private sector companies, imagine having a resident board that lives with you and meets twice a week. It's a different issue, but I think that it means that we have an opportunity. We've got to make some changes in the way we're structured. The good news is that when we do have an opportunity and we're able to move quickly, the potential is just outstanding. We can make a huge difference and a very positive difference. We just have to find a way to do it all the time.
Do you think there's something systemic, though, when you try and eradicate poverty, that there's something which needs a change in the paradigm that exists in order to make that transformation? And indeed, part of that is, of course, the delivery of knowledge, as you've been saying.
Right. Well, you know, the conversation I've been having inside the World Bank is, I first started just by asking, how long do you think it'll take for us to end absolute poverty? And of course, that's people living on less than $1.25 a day. And the answer is that we're at about 22%, and absolute poverty is going down at about 1% a year, so 20 to 25 years. So then the question I asked was, if we were at our absolute best all the time, if we could get agreement with all of the important partners that we work with every day, if we could start a social movement to end poverty sooner, could we do it? Could we end poverty sooner than in 20 to 25 years? And I didn't know what reaction I was going to get. You know, our institution is full of people who are the absolute leaders in measuring, defining, understanding poverty in the world. And so far, the answer has been, well, gosh, we're not sure, but that's a really exciting idea. So we're having fundamental conversations inside the bank about how we're organized. And the question that we're asking is, how would we have to be organized? How would we have to relate to our partners? How would we have to relate to bilateral donors, nation states that are donor countries? How would we have to change the way we act and the way we work with others to be able to, and the term I'm using specifically is bend the arc of history. Paraphrasing Martin Luther King, the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. And my question is, what would it take to bend the arc of history so that we can actually end poverty in, say, half the time or a much less time? What would it take? What I found is that's been a great question for the World Bank, and right now everything's on the table.
But the obstacles, there are huge obstacles in the way, not
Absolutely.
least corruption in many parts of the world, that sort of thing.
Right. Corruption is a huge issue. The ninth president of the World Bank, Jim Wolfenson, was the first to really call it what it was and began using the C word, as he says, corruption. And now we have what I feel are just outstanding safeguards to prevent corruption. It's difficult to capture every single instance.
Is it getting better?
Oh, I think it's getting better. I think there's no question that it's getting better. And let me put it this way. There's no question that we're getting much better at detecting corruption. And I think I believe anyway, that we're also getting better at communicating to our member countries that corruption will not be tolerated and that there are other ways of accomplishing their goals and that they can avoid corruption. So we're working on it on many different angles, but there are examples today where we're not going forward on projects because of corruption.
Now, you came from Dartmouth, obviously Dartmouth University. It's an academic institution. You're at a financial institution now. Are there any parallels that you can draw? Are there any lessons that you learned from Dartmouth that you can bring to bear at the World Bank?
Well, at Dartmouth, we had a $3.5 billion endowment, and I had about an $800 million budget. So I did have some experience running an institution, but I'd say the institutions are in some ways much more similar than you'd think, and in some ways very different. My experience at the World Bank has been that, yes, it's a lending institution, yes, it's in fact a bank, but the knowledge part of it is just so much more significant than almost anyone realizes. We have some 4,000 PhDs, people with training in all kinds of different areas. And I think what's really special about the bank is just what I was talking about today, is that it's people with a very different kind of knowledge. These are people who've written PhD dissertations in many different areas of economics and other social sciences, but then come to the bank and spend 10, 15, 20, sometimes 30 years taking loans, taking them to countries, and then helping clients problem solve to ensure that the loans and sometimes grants actually have the impact that everyone intends. That's a very special kind of knowledge, and that's what I think differentiates it from many, especially institutions like Dartmouth, the Ivy League institutions, where you have people pursuing many, many different areas of research, and often the research is very what we call upstream, not likely to have an enormous practical impact in the near future. But at the World Bank, we have people who've been taking their vast knowledge and the evidence that we generated at the bank and have been applying it every day. And here's the difference. What I've been hearing from these people that I call the master practitioners of development is that they have felt that work that they do has not been captured, has not been valued, has not been rewarded, and that we don't have channels through which to spread that knowledge. And that's the most valuable of all. I mean, we have people in our group who've worked in many of the great middle-income financial crises of the last 20 years. And they've been to these countries, they've met with the principals, they've seen how one group of people made good choices and others made bad choices. And that just sort of, the knowledge that sort of just sits with them is so valuable. We now need to begin to tease that out and make it available to everybody.
Well, how do you leverage it? That's a challenge, isn't it?
That's the challenge. It's not impossible. It's not impossible, and I think there are lots of interesting new ways that people are thinking about capturing the knowledge. And so in my work with Michael Porter, I went to Mike probably 7 or 8 years ago and said, I see so much going on in global health. And it's like everybody's reinventing the wheel. There must be a scientific way to approach the delivery problem. And Mike said, well, you know, you'd think that there would be, but look at the American healthcare system. They haven't figured out that problem in the American healthcare system either. So there seems to be a fundamental kind of fantasy. And let me describe the way the fantasy works in the American healthcare system. There's this notion that if you take great knowledge, the things that we learn from basic science, and you give it to trustworthy individuals, you're done. So great knowledge in the hands of physicians, you're done. And who are the people who run the healthcare systems in the United States? Mostly physicians who are so good at being doctors, they put them in charge of running a system for which they're completely untrained.
Hang on, you're a doctor and you've been put into a position as head of the World Bank.
Evidence number one, right? Well, in my case, this problem of people who have great technical skill, who are put into leadership positions and then have to manage, it's one I've taken pretty seriously. And the way I take it seriously is, you know, I have a leadership and management coach. I've been a student of management and operations, and I've been fascinated by it. It's sort of the anthropology side of me that there are tremendous insights into actually how to be a more effective leader, tremendous insights into sort of the strategies that are effective. And so I've done my own kind of personal tutorial with people like Michael Porter, people like Marshall Goldsmith, who's my leadership coach, because I've tried to approach with humility the task of running this kind of institution. It's not just something that you walk into and it comes naturally. I've got a lot of people helping me. Mike has already been a couple times to the World Bank to try to help us think about strategy. And the most important thing, I think, is humility in the face of the complexity of actually delivering on anything.
Can I continue with the doctor references?
Sure.
And actually take a look at, perhaps change tack and look at what's going wrong with the global economy. What is going wrong with it? I had somebody the other day say that it is actually, the arteries are blocked. Now, what's your view on this?
Well, you know, we at the bank are watching the global economy very carefully, and I've spent a lot of time, especially recently, talking to European leaders. There's no simple answer to that question. I think one way of looking at it is all of these countries are looking at paths towards solidarity, and I think one of the recent changes has been that I've seen a much more higher level of determination to, for example, keep Greece in the Eurozone. There are some, I think, mildly encouraging signs. The credit default swap area, I mean, it's a little bit less worrisome than it was before. But don't get me wrong, there's likely to be difficult problems for a long time to come. Now, in the midst of all that, I haven't taken to prognosticating. I'm not sure how it would be helpful for the World Bank president to prognosticate. What I've been doing, though, is talking about what the World Bank needs to do to protect and provide sources so that the poorest countries can be more resilient under the stresses.
That's the issue, isn't it?
That's the issue,
because they are dependent on demand from the West, and if the Western developed nations
but not
dries
completely,
up.
not completely. I mean, you know, you've seen some of the things that we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years are really encouraging. For example, I mean, when I was starting my work at the World Health Organization in 2003, where we had some 25 million people living with HIV, only about 30, 40,000 treated, unsure of what the situation was going to be, whether there was going to be a mass die-off of people living with HIV. Look at the situation now. There's 7 or 8 million people on treatment with HIV, but moreover, there's been an average of about 5% growth in African countries. You know, maybe only one country where there's hyperinflation. I mean, the African economies have done a lot of things right. I mean, and in Latin America, my team at the World Bank would argue that because of changes that were made in the 1980s, they recovered from the events of 2008 and 2009 more quickly. Not, you know, some of the northern countries more quickly, some of the other ones, but you know, even though we have downgraded our assessments of the growth of Latin America, it will continue to grow. more than half of the growth of the world is in those countries. And so I would say this. We're working with them on really specific things. Like tonight I'm going to be flying to Tokyo, then I'll be going up to Sendai. And in the wake of what happened in Sendai, the World Bank has been working a lot on what we're calling this catastrophic drawdown funds, where the poorer countries can prepare for the disasters that might happen and create greater resilience in the face of disasters like what happened in Sendai. But it's what we're going to talk about tomorrow, but it's a nice overall theme. We're trying to build resilience into the developing countries so that every economic cycle doesn't just wipe them out.
But what about this economic cycle?
So, for example, let's look at the coming together of two sets of problems. One, due to the first drought, which climate scientists have clearly attributed to man-made global warming, especially in the United States and other parts of the world, we had a spike in food prices, right? In the context of also the ongoing Eurozone crisis, this has created a lot of stresses. And so what we've been doing is very specifically providing direct budget support so that countries don't find themselves forcing mothers to choose between feeding their kids or keeping their kids in school. So the immediate response we've been working on, trying to ensure that there is food security in some of the poorest countries. But the bigger issue is long-term sustainable agriculture. In the context of climate change, this is a difficult problem, but many of the developed countries, many of the donor countries have really focused on trying to build long-term strategies for agricultural sustainability in these African and Latin American countries, and we've got a big fund now in which we're doing just that. So, in the face of these crises, you know, we stand ready to help in whatever way we can. But our main role is building both short-term, medium, and long-term resilience among the poorer countries.
Well, given the length and the severity of the downturn we've had, when I talk to you in a more esoteric way about what's going on, is it really a case of a transfer of the wealth of the world?
What do you mean?
A balancing of the world.
Well,
a shift, as people have been saying, from west to east.
You know, one of the things that I've learned, especially from Professor Porter, from Mike, my friend Mike, when he talks about competition, the important thing, and I didn't understand this for the longest time, when he talks about competition, what he means is that the more every single country assesses its own strengths, assesses its own weaknesses, assesses its own local, regional, and global context, and becomes more competitive, the better it is for everybody. This is not a zero-sum game. And so what you're finding is that Latin American and African countries have taken this very seriously, and many of them are getting more competitive. Let me just give you a quick example. So Rwanda is a country that I know very well. I've worked there. And we publish a report every year called the Doing Business Report. And they looked at that and they said, oh my goodness, we take this very seriously. It takes 99 days to register small or medium enterprises in Rwanda. We're going to change it. And so using that report, they really put pressure on their regulatory authorities, and now that is 2 days. And it's not surprising that they've had 7 or 8% growth a year over the last 5 or 6 years. And other countries that are taking seriously these things we know, if it takes 99 days to register a business, you are not going to see the explosion of the private sector and the creation of good jobs, which is what everyone wants. So in our view, it's really not a question fundamentally of just redistributing. It's a question of making sure that every country has the knowledge and from our perspective, the direct technical support to become more competitive given whatever it is their assets are.
Now, you do keep on mentioning about one size does not fit all when it comes to these problems. Now, give us a few more examples of that where it's been specific to that country that you've had to come up with a solution or delivery, as you'd say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's look at Cote d'Ivoire, right? So I was just there, and Cote d'Ivoire is a country that makes up about 40% of the West African economy. And 20 years ago, they were a beacon of educational opportunity. Their universities were the best in the area. Great scholars came from Cote d'Ivoire. And they've just now gone through 20 years of war. And it was only in May, I think, of 2011 that the current president, President Ouattara, became president. Now, the President Ouattara is a very sophisticated man. He was a former deputy managing director of the International Monetary Fund. And so for President Ouattara, he is now the president of what we call a fragile state. It's just trying to lift itself out of fragility. But for that particular country, there's all kinds of things that we need to look at. You know, everything as small a scale as ensuring that cashew farmers in the rural areas can decrease the time it takes for them to process their cashews and then give them access to global markets. That's the project one of the projects I looked at. That could have a dramatic impact. Another project that we're working on is, since this is a post-conflict state, we worked with the government to set up training programs. And in the training program, one gentleman stood up and said, you know, thank you for coming. Thank you for starting this program along with the government. But let me tell you, I'm in this program. I'm learning how to be an electrician. But my brothers and sisters don't have access to this program, and a lot of my friends don't have access to the program. Guess what's going to happen if conflict starts again? They're going to go right back to being soldiers. I've put down my arms. I see a different future for myself. But unless you scale up these programs, you're going to have conflict again. So in this particular area, everything from enhancing their agricultural ability to deliver, to provide markets for their small cashew growers, to building jobs programs is what we need to do in Côte d'Ivoire. It's different in other countries. Right now in South Africa, as I mentioned today, they don't need our money. They don't need loans from us. What they need more than anything else is our experience in making policies actually deliver, which is why we're starting the delivery hub there.
So it seems almost like the role of the World Bank is changing and evolving into morphing, if you like, into something completely different.
Well, it's not completely different in the sense that we're in fact, I think, trying to move much more strongly to first principles. You walk in the door, and on the wall it says, thanks to Jim Wolfenson, our dream is a world free of poverty. I mean, it doesn't get any clearer than that. And I keep telling World Bank employees, everybody, you should just thank your lucky stars that you get to work at the bank. Because your kids ask you, what are you doing today at work? You can tell them, I'm going to end poverty again today. What a great job. What a great opportunity we have. So if what we do is work to end poverty, and you know, our recent, the World Development Report of 2013 just came out, and it's on jobs. And that report showed that 90% of all jobs are created in the private sector. So our path is pretty clear. End poverty. We have to do everything we can to boost growth, especially in the private sector, because that's where the good jobs are going to come from. And what we also know is that from the Arab Spring, if you don't include young people, if you go down a path of economic growth where you have 7-8% even economic growth, but it's not inclusive, if 50% of your young people are unemployed, that's a fundamental source of instability. So end poverty, boost prosperity, and boost prosperity in a way so that it's shared. We know a lot about what to do, and what I'm asking people now is, just tell me how what you do every day lines up with those fundamental priorities.
I want to shift again and have a look at the developed world and just get your views to how long is this process going to take? Is it a question of years of deleveraging, people basically living well beyond their means?
Well, as I said earlier, I still don't. I'm not very good at prognosticating, and I'm not sure how much that I can add. But there are different voices that have said this is going to go on for another decade. Let me tell you what I take away from that. When our colleagues at the IMF recently said this is going to go on for a decade, I think it's a very important message so that people and governments, especially in developing countries, the developing countries have got to start asking themselves a different kind of question. Not how can I respond in the next 6 months to the current crisis, but what's the world going to look like in 10 years? What should our strategy be in 10 years? Just to give you an example, we just wrote a report with the Chinese government, and we published it together, and it's called China 2030, and it actually looks at what are going to be the sources of Chinese growth in the year 2030, and this was wonderful because it pointed out, for example, that among the sources of growth for China is going to be domestic consumption. They know that they're going to have to move much more toward increasing domestic consumption if they are going to continue to grow. So that's where we want to be. We want to be the people who say, well, however long this lasts, it's really important not to shape your behavior based on the last 3 months or the next 6 months or the next year. Really think about the foundations for long-term economic growth.
When you look at the success of, let's say, South Korea or indeed China, do you draw lessons from it as well in terms of how you advise other developing countries?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, so many of the people who are responsible for what happened in South Korea are here in this room, and I have to say, I'm very deeply humbled by being here. But what they'll remember is that in the late 1950s and early 1960s, the development specialists called Korea a basket case. No way. I mean, this was a time when modernization theory was very popular, and the notion was that only countries with lots of exposure to Western cultural norms would be able to grow. And so Korea, which they used to call a fundamentalist Confucian culture, and I say this in front of my mother who's a Confucian scholar, they said there's no way. She's very embarrassed, by the way. There's no way that Korea would grow because of these cultural constraints. And then 20 years later, as Korea took off, they said Korea is growing because of Confucian culture, right? Tells you a couple of quick things. What I would say is, one, we should never again call any country a basket case country, right? This is just something that so lacking in humility. We should never do it again. But secondly, what I'd say is that it's really, one has to be, I think, very humble in trying to make simplistic arguments that explain many, many complex behaviors, right? So there's, to say that Confucian culture was the source of Korean economic growth, it takes away from the incredibly hard work that so many young women did for so many years in the factories, some of the brilliant and sometimes not so brilliant, but over time, brilliant decisions that have been made by government, by business leaders. And so for me, to get back to the theme of the day, lots and lots of people in the world are trying to understand what happened in Korea. How was it that Korea went from a situation where in the 1950s they had the same GDP per capita as Ghana, right? And whereas Japan had very high literacy rates even in the 1890s, Korea did not have very high literacy rates even in the middle of this century. So, to my great surprise, I went to Ethiopia on a recent visit, and the ministers throughout the country, when they met me, they would come up to me and they would say, "Tell me about Semaul Undong," right? Semaul Undong was the rural development project in Korea, and every single one of them in Ethiopia had studied Semaul Undong as part of their study of the Korean development process. So I look forward over the next few years of working very closely with Korean people, both in the private sector and in the government, to really capture how it was that this happened.
What did that project do?
I don't know. It's been a few years since I wrote about it for my PhD dissertation. But what I remember about it is it put new roofs on houses in the rural sector, and it really encouraged rural development at a time when some might have said, well, urbanization is the natural flow. And what I learned from the Ethiopians about Semaul Undong was they were telling me that, for them, one of the lessons was that there is a role for industrial policy. That was one of the lessons that they took out of it, which might be controversial. But another lesson that they took out of it was that you can have a balanced approach to economic development that doesn't ignore the rural sector, and it's very important for them to support their rural sector.
I wouldn't say it's the elephant in the room, but it's something like that. And we're talking about North Korea here, and you have, of course, a personal story to tell on that as well. But how does the World Bank engage with a reclusive regime like that?
I'm not sure. And my father was a refugee. He came down from North Korea, and he literally just knew a border guard. And when he was 17, graduating from high school, he came through the border by himself. He had an uncle and maybe a few friends and relatives, but no source of income. And he somehow got himself admitted to Seoul National University Dental School. And so he became a dentist. Actually, I met my mother in New York. There were very few Koreans in New York at the time. and then they came back to the United States. But since he was 17, he's never seen his family again. So he had, I think, 6 brothers and sisters. So I have cousins, uncles and aunts who are living right now, I think, in North Korea. And as a physician, watching what's happening up there is just absolutely heartbreaking. So just off the top of my head, I would say that what the World Bank does really, really well is infrastructure. We are really good at helping to build roads and electrical grids, and also healthcare systems, educational systems. We're very good at that, and we've done that in many of the poorest countries in the world. So if there was any path for me to be able to help, it would personally mean a lot to me.
But has there ever been a path? Has there been any approach?
Not since I've been president of the World Bank. Not since I've been president. But I think for many, many reasons, fundamentally humanitarian ones, but for other reasons, I just think it would if we were asked, I would be extremely grateful for the opportunity to try to do something in North Korea.
I want to move back to the state of Europe and tell me, what can the World Bank do to alleviate the situation in places like Greece? Or, we've got Spain in the headlines now as well. We've had Ireland, of course, and Portugal, etc. Well,
this gets to the question of North Korea. We can never intervene unless we're asked to intervene. And so we've been having informal conversations with lots of different countries. And what I think is most helpful is that we're not saying we have the answers, because this is something that we don't do anymore. We don't say there's one answer that fits everybody. But what we do say is, well, we have some great experiences in many middle-income countries when they've gone through their own financial crises. And we've got the actual people who took those countries through those crises. And we saw the decisions they made. We saw the kind of, tough analysis that they had to do. And if that set of experiences might be helpful to anybody, we would be more than happy to offer those up. Because I think it's not so much that we have all the wisdom, but to be able to have at your side, maybe 5 or 6 people from the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, who've been through these experiences with these other countries. The leaders of some of these countries might be able to think a little bit differently about what they see as the policy and action choices that are in front of them. So, in particular, things that we think we understand fairly well are, the nature of social sector expenditures. We are very good at assessing whether social sector expenditures are actually progressive and helping the poor and having an impact.
Delivery again.
Yeah, delivery again. We're very good at assessing it. But there are many countries who've, for example, been very committed to fuel price subsidies. And fuel price subsidies again and again have shown not to be progressive and not to be particularly helpful in terms of social protection. But they're hard to get rid of because people like to have them politically. Again, we would never be prescriptive in any way. But I would if I were a leader of one of these countries, I would love to have some folks around me who have had the kind of experience that our people have had in so many places in the world.
Well, let's just hear from one of the former leaders of one of these countries. I'm taking one question, and that's from Wim Kok, who wanted to ask a question of you, and if I can just bring you in.
Well, I listened with great interest and a lot of sympathy to President Kim, to what you said about how Korea developed in 50 years' time from a real developing country into an exemplary model for development and growth. And Korea now has turned into an important donor country too, which is extremely important, focused on delivery and performance. So I wondered, during the discussion and also during your speech, in what ways potentially the World Bank and Korea could cooperate even more fruitfully in order to help the developing countries in realizing higher rates of delivery success. Thanks.
Well, there's a great question, Mr. Prime Minister. I was just talking with with Minister Hong from the Minister of Knowledge Economy. And we would love to start maybe with this meeting. I'll be returning next week for another session. Korea is really emerging as one of the most important donor countries. And the self-conscious decision to focus future growth on the knowledge economy, the fact that there are so many great scholars resident in Korea and also of Korean descent who are working elsewhere, I would love to find a way to make knowledge and this notion of a science of delivery a fundamental part of the new relationship that Korea and the World Bank develops. But it's, again, it's something that for which I'll be speaking with President Lee and others. It's a great question, though. It very much comes to mind when I come here.
Okay, let's also have a look at the Chinese economy.
Yes.
Of course, slowing down slightly at the moment, it's taking its toll in Southeast Asia to some extent. Well, yeah, I don't want you to prognosticate, as you don't like doing that, but you talked about 30 years hence, and that's the way it's looked at, isn't it?
Yeah. My own interactions with Chinese leaders is that they are looking very hard at growth of the future. Let me just give you one example. There are companies and groups of people in China that are really trying to turn climate change mitigation and adaptation into a growth area for them. There are companies there, and not very many people know about them, that are trying to do that. I am quite impressed with the extent to which the Chinese government is trying to think about where it's going to be in 2020, in 2030, in 2040, and they're planning for that right now. Now, there are complications, there are difficulties, we know them all. But I just have to say that the officials that I've worked with and interacted with to date have impressed me with their long-term view. And yes, growth will be lower, but it will still be, I think, over 7%. So,
but it still is going to be crucial for this part of the world, how much China grows.
Absolutely. It's going to be crucial for this part of the world. And I think if you look, what has China's growth meant to the world as a whole? We've achieved the Millennium Development Goal #1, which is to have the number of people living in poverty. Well, that was to a huge extent based on the growth of the Chinese economy. The Chinese have lifted more people out of absolute poverty than any other country in history. And so there's no question that the future growth of the Chinese economy is really important. And I would just say this is why I'm so encouraged by the fact that the Chinese government has engaged with us on thinking about what the sources of growth will be in the future. I think they're looking hard at it. I think they're going through a political change of season right now. But
I'll come to that in a minute.
Yes, I'm fully aware that I'm very encouraged how much they're looking at their future prospects, but also their responsibility to the entire region.
When we talk about delivery, is there anything you've learned from the way they've delivered economic growth and delivered, well, a bit more affluence? I wouldn't say affluence, but as you say, lifted people out of poverty.
Yeah, there are very specific examples. I mean, for example, we did an irrigation project in a particular area of China in which they didn't really need our money to tackle the project, but they wanted to engage with our agricultural experts. They wanted to take advantage of our capacity to collect data and analyze data. And so we built this wonderful terracing agricultural project, and we, as the World Bank, learned so much from it that we've actually taken those lessons and implemented them in an African country. So
has it worked?
It's working. It worked very well in China. And so that's been, to a great extent, our relationship with China. They're no longer borrowing from our concessional loan window, the IDA window. But many of the projects, like, for example, 70% of all the projects that we're working on with China are around sustainability. So for us to remain a World Bank, we have to be deeply engaged with all of the middle-income countries. And we're learning tremendous lessons from all of them. Brazil, for example, has reduced its Gini coefficient dramatically in the last few years. And the way they see it is, I think, very encouraging for everybody. What they're saying is, we don't see it as just reducing inequality. We see it as launching many more of our citizens into productive activity so that the economy can grow even more. I think that's a wonderful way to look at it.
Just going back to China here as well, and I'm putting your anthropologist hat on. Can you have economic freedom without social and political freedom?
Let me try to think of a good anthropological way to answer that. You know, one of the things that we do as a World Bank is that we really avoid as much as possible commenting on internal political matters, because look at our member states.
Okay,
we have 188 member countries, and this is important. We have 188 member countries, and they take very different approaches to a whole range of problems. And yet they're all our member countries, and we sit at the table and we discuss difficult issues, everything from coal, for example. We take on really, really difficult issues. And
can I rephrase the question?
Right, but what I'm saying is it's always a compromise, and what we do at the World Bank is that we, in a full-throated way, embrace multilateralism. And with multilateralism comes great complexity, and it also requires tremendous respect for the internal political sovereignty of nation states.
I'll let this one rest then.
Okay.
You've been, what, president now of the World Bank, what, 14 weeks?
14 weeks, 14 whole weeks, yes.
How's it been?
You know, I can't imagine, I don't want to sound frivolous, but I really am having the time of my life. I mean, every day I walk in and I look up and it says, our dream is a world free of poverty. So every day I go to work to try to end poverty and to try to boost prosperity, to try to help every country become more competitive and more prosperous. It's the greatest job in the world. And that's just what Jim Wolfenson told me. He said to me, Jim, you're very lucky because it's the best job in the world. And I said, why? He said, well, Bob McNamara told me that it's the best job in the world. And here's why I think it is. He said, because every day you get to work to end poverty, and you're working with some of the greatest staff that you'll ever meet. I found both those things to be true.
Do you see things differently to your predecessor?
You know, let me put it this way. Every World Bank president has brought to the game different strengths. Right? You know, I think Bob Zoellick had enormous experience in, you know, he worked in the private sector, he was a trade representative, you know, he'd worked in the State Department, so he brought to the job strengths that I just could never even dream of in terms of his role. My particular background, the things that are new about me are, one, I'm the first actual development practitioner who's had the job.
And you come from have a different worldview, surely?
Well, you know, my worldview has been impacted deeply by my experience working in places like Haiti and in the slums of Peru and in Africa and even in the prisons of Siberia. So you know, I would say that I try very hard to not be ideological, but be very focused on things like delivery. And so, you know, the things that are different about me, one, I'm a development practitioner. Two, I've actually run a knowledge institution, and the bank really is a knowledge institution in a very important way. And the third is I'm trained in science. I'm the first bank president also trained in science. And so for me, issues like global warming and climate change are going to really come to the fore just because I feel like I have to play a role in interpreting the science of climate change for our member countries.
A final question.
Yes, sir.
What keeps you up at night?
Other than my 3-year-old son, you know...
And also in the realms of decency, of course.
Yeah. What keeps me up at night is worrying that we might have missed something and we're not doing enough to protect the poorest from what might happen if the economic situation gets worse. It's what keeps me up at night, and I think it's also fundamentally my job description.
Please, everybody, Dr. Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was good. Thank you so much.